the time that Sir Arthur Wellesley returned to England in 1814, he'd been created Duke of Wellington. The Peninsular Wars were the making of Wellington, and he returned home as the most famous and well-respected British military officer of his generation. He'd come from a relatively auspicious background. He came from the Wellesley family, an ambitious family who had their own patronage and political ambitions. But Arthur himself had not been thought much of as a child and had been seen as little better as cannon fodder to be sent out to serve wherever was necessary. He'd secured a posting in India in the 1790s, he'd fought his way through several wars and returned to England in 1806 to try and claim the bride who had spurned him on an earlier occasion. He went out to the Peninsula in 1808 and over the course of the next 6 years established himself through a daring series of defensive actions and, as at Salamanca, a great offensive victory. By the time that the Duke returned in 1814, he'd become a Duke, a member of the House of Lords, but his future was uncertain. He heard news in the spring of 1815 that Napoleon had made a daring escape from Elba, and he was recalled to arms and service, placed in charge of the Allied forces which were to confront him at Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington had secured a magnificent victory at the Battle of Waterloo, but what was he going to do with it? He was appointed commander of the Army of Occupation in France between 1815 and 1818, and on returning to England at the end of that period, he entered British politics. He entered the cabinet as Master General of the Ordnance, a position he continued in until 1827. Over the course of that period, Wellington became increasingly politicised and was increasingly marked out as an opponent of political change and parliamentary reform in particular. He became Prime Minister between 1828 and 1830, and again briefly in 1834. But he received a rough ride at the hands of the public, who regarded him as somewhat of a reactionary, as an opponent of political change. Nevertheless, Wellington continued in the House of Lords and in high political office throughout the rest of his life. He gathered a great number of titles and honorary positions and lived out as an elder statesman until his death in September 1852. He was then accorded the rare honour of a state funeral. By this period, there was something of a Wellington industry with a wide range of commemorative wares dedicated to his memory. This perpetuated his image in all manner of different forms, including doorstops, trinket boxes, and salt-glazed jugs. It also benefited from changes in the technology and production of newspapers and illustrated magazines. The Illustrated London News, which had a circulation in the thousands by the time of Wellington's death, gave great attention to the ceremonies surrounding Wellington's state funeral. It concentrated, perhaps not surprisingly, on his greatest military victories, including those in the Peninsular Wars and at Waterloo.